All right. So in previous episodes, quite a few of them, I talked about this idea of inflammation, right? And I talked about inflammation in a sense that how do we avoid certain types of inflammation, but I also mentioned that inflammation can be a good thing too, as well, right? And we don't necessarily want to blunt the good inflammation response. But I kind of fell into this whole idea of good versus bad inflammation, and 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 let me just say that I typically don't think of it in that way, and I'll explain why, and I'll break it down a little bit. But I want to kind of, for lack of better terms, I want to nerd out real quick, right? What is inflammation, though? Right? When we say inflammation, what do we mean? Right? So we mean it's a biological response that occurs when the body's immune system reacts to harmful stimuli such as pathogens, damaged cells, or irritants. So think about like pathogens, viruses and bacteria, right? Damaged cells, which also could be dead cells, right? That happens naturally, not naturally, but it happens through like exercise, right? Movement, things like that, or trauma, injury, things like that, right? And then or irritants, and that's a kind of a catch-all phrase there that covers, say, environmental factors like chemicals and things, and maybe preservatives, or don't get me started yet, but I will get there. I will get to that point, right? But those would be other irritants like toxins, right? So how does it work? How does this inflammatory process work? And it kind of goes in like 5 or 6 different steps, right? So the first stage is a recognition stage, right? This is when the harmful stimuli is first detected, and your body triggers an immune response, and the immune cells, I think they're called dendritic cells and macrophages, recognize the harmful stimuli through receptors that bind to molecules associated with those pathogens or damaged tissue or those damaged cells, right? So let me say that a little bit more clearly, right? So these cells go out and they see the harmful cells, the harmful cells that are causing trauma, right? They're causing a whole bunch of mess inside of your body, and these cells figure out like, oh, here they go. This is what we we're gonna have to clean this up, right? So you have like, they're almost like alert cells, right? Like they're like the security guards of your body, right? They're sitting there like, okay, they just trooping, right? They just going through, walking through, trying to figure out what's going on. And they see somebody that doesn't belong, they're just like, alert, alert, they gotta go, right? So then the next thing is, what happens is your body releases what these things are called inflammatory mediators, okay? These dendritic cells and macrophages release signaling molecules called inflammatory mediators. These are the cytokines, histamines, and the like, right? Cytokines is a big one, though, and we'll talk about that more later. And they help coordinate the body's response to injury or infection, okay? The next thing that happens then, your blood vessels change, right? Your blood vessels dilate or widen, and they also become more permeable, meaning more immune cells and proteins can go through the blood vessels into the tissues that are affected, okay? And then the next thing happens, it's called immune cell activation. You get additional immune cells that get activated. These are the neutrophils and these are the lymphocytes, right? And they're shot to the area of, inflammation. Because mind you, the signal was already sent out. We need increased blood flow to this area because there's damage or bacteria or some other thing here. So the inflammation is the actual blood flowing to that area, right? So that's where you think about it, the symptoms of inflammation, right? You get heat from the area because blood flow is moving there. You get swelling because the fluid is moving there, right? So everything is being shuttled to that area. And a lot of times, because you get the swelling, you also get like pain because it presses up against your nerve endings. So that's an inflammatory response. But what happens is those initial immune cells send out the signal like, hey, we need to send all this stuff here because of this alert. All right, we got to send everybody here. All right. So then that's when the immune cells get there. The neutrophils and the lymphocytes are shot into that area of inflammation. And they are the cleaners. They clear out pathogens, dead or damaged cells, and they initiate tissue repair. Okay. Then you have this next process called phagocytosis. This is when the immune cells engulf and ingest the pathogens, debris, and dead cells. I think that's the coolest part, right? So I think that's what your T cells and your B cells do, right? They basically take these bad cells and jack them up, for lack of better terms. They bodies, right, to whatever that pathogen or whatever that damaged or dead cell is, right? And then the final closing of this process is basically you get resolution and healing. So once the harmful stimuli is eliminated, the body releases anti-inflammatory signals that and the affected areas basically start to heal. Immune cells then at that point, so the security guards that we saw from the very beginning, the dendritic cells and the macrophages, what they do basically, either if they're alive still, they basically just go back into a resting period where they're going back on security duty. They're back on desk duty, so they're looking around, they're just waiting, right? Or if they happen to not have made it through the battle, they get cleared away. Okay. So as an aside to all this, so that's how the process works. But as an aside to all of this, I have this thought, and I'm just kind of been mulling it over. Now, I'm not sure there are any studies that back this up at all, and I don't. So don't take this as a recommendation, and don't take this as I know for a fact. I do not. It's just me thinking in general, right? Now, if you know of any studies that will actually back up what I'm about to say, then please let me know, because I think this part is very interesting. But I can see how why exogenous testosterone injections, like or right. I could see how that works in terms of muscle building, or at least one of the ways that it could work in muscle building, right? Because, like, think about it, the neutrophils, in terms of muscle building, what these things do, right? Because your body has an immune response to bacteria or virus, right? That's infection. It has an immune response to other, like, chemicals and things like that don't belong, like toxins in your body, and that can come from like environmental factors, food factors, all that fun stuff. But it also you have an immune response to exercise, to working out, because you could cause small little micro tears in your muscles, right? So like you have an immune response to actual trauma to the tissue. So understanding that these cells play a role in remodeling the muscle tissue and growing more muscle. So what the neutrophils do is that they send out the signal for muscle repair. Macrophages oversee the general process, so to speak, and they also release cytokines, which promote tissue healing and remodeling. So all three of those cells are affected by testosterone. Testosterone can enhance the activity and the production of these cells in particular, which means, like, think about it. If you have more activity from those cells, you basically have more muscle tissue repair. And if you have more muscle tissue repair, then you have faster recovery and potentially more muscle protein synthesis and more muscle, which, again, I'm just kind of rapping a little bit, and this is just a thought process. Again, not backed by studies or anything like that, but I'm just thinking my way through this one a little bit, right? It just seems like there's a way for, like, it just makes sense to me, primarily because, like, you see these guys who are on something, right, and they're working out for hours upon hours without fail, and they put on muscle like it's no one's business, and it's like it's easy, and they recover faster. obviously tearing down muscle tissue. So it's like there has to be some part of that process that they're able to recover and heal faster. But this is part of the recovering and healing process. So the macrophages, the neutrophils, and the cytokines are important in that process. So, just logically thinking about it, I can see a pathway in which extra testosterone means extra immune cells. But here's the kicker. The kicker is, at least now I've seen this on one study, extra testosterone coming from outside of your body actually suppresses your immune system. So whereas it might promote growth in the neutrophils and the macrophages and the cytokines, it'll actually suppress the production and activity of your T cells and your B cells. Those are the ones that are responsible for doing all the killing. They're the ones that are responsible for taking out all of the damaged cells or the bacteria, infection, or anything like that. So I think it's not an easy like one for one, and it seems to be a complex situation. But I can kind of see a pathway in which, okay, that's how the muscle building actually happens, right? Set aside all the other anabolic stuff, right? Like just from a purely an immune system state, like I think that's one part in which that works for the muscle building side, right? Now, I don't even really say that because that's not necessarily a case for you to go out and get testosterone injections, not at all. But I say for two reasons. One reason is that this makes sense to me because I think this is why females have some form of testosterone, right? Obviously for the muscle building part, but they're not able to build as much muscle in a general sense, right? But I think also for an immune system setup, I think that certain amount of testosterone is beneficial because, again, the testosterone kind of is responsible for the growth and the activity of those cells. At least it can be linked to high activity of the neutrophils, macrophages, and cytokines, right? So it's all kind of like a puzzle that's kind of coming together here, right? And hopefully I stated my point really clear. But the second thing that I'm really concerned about concerning this, the second point is that while I'm not promoting getting testosterone injections, what I am promoting is having a healthy and adequate level of testosterone. So here's just another thing against low T, right? And I did a whole episode on that. And I didn't even talk about any of that. Well, I might have talked about a little bit about this. But adequate levels of testosterone almost ensures that you have good neutrophil, macrophage, cytokine production. And I think that's decent, right? Because that ensures that you have a strong immune system and a pretty decent muscle building response. So I think that's just another data point to say, keep your T up, right? But and outside of that too, right? This is another kind of I'm not telling you to go out and get injections or anything like that, because actually that would be, whereas extra testosterone lowers your T cells and B cells, regular exercise has been shown to increase your T cells and B cells. So just by regularly exercising, here we go again. Just by regularly exercising, you can have adequate testosterone levels. You can increase your T cell and B cell activity. You can increase your muscle mass. You can improve your health. Simple exercise, resistance training. Resistance training, yet again, right? So if anything, I'm just basically talking all around, just saying, hey, get out there and lift some weights, for lack of better terms, right? Because that's what, and that's not the entirety of it, but that's part of what exercising does for your immune system. That's how it gets boosted. That's how you get your weight up, right? And so, let me not stay there too long, but that's the idea. But the thing is, many people tend to separate this idea of like they separate good versus bad inflammation. And where they say like good inflammation is only an acute response and bad inflammation is a prolonged chronic condition, right? And then it's like I used to look at it that way, but I tend to look at it this way instead. And I know there are a bunch of different doctors that will back me up on this one. Again, not a doctor, but I tend to look at inflammation as a thing unto itself. So like inflammation is inflammation. It's not good or bad. It's just what is it in response to? That thing that it's in response to is either good or bad. For instance, right? You have like you have the process of inflammation that I just listed out earlier, right? You have that whole process going on. The process is pretty much the same though, whether you're exercising or whether you have autoimmune disease. It's the same process, right? So I don't see inflammation as good or bad. I see either the exercise as good or bad or the autoimmune disease as good or bad. Obviously, autoimmune disease I see as bad and exercise I see as good, right? So I look at it that way, right? Because the whole idea is this, right? You don't want to be inflamed past your ability to clean, repair, and heal. I'll repeat that. You don't want to be inflamed past your ability to clean, repair, or heal. Okay. Now, there are a number of different things that can cause that, right? Not only just disease in general, but like over exercise, too much of a good thing can cause that. So over exercising can cause that, right? That's overtraining. And note, when you hit a state of overtraining, you end up getting sick, right? Why? Because you're basically constantly, you're inflamed beyond your ability to clean, repair, and heal. And that's where a whole plethora of other diseases and conditions and maladies come from, right? So you don't want to be inflamed past your ability to clean, repair, and heal. And what causes that though, right? So now we're going to go into what most call bad inflammation. But what causes bad inflammation, right? We already know good inflammation, it's mostly exercise, right? And if you have a healthy immune system and you're going out places and you're doing things, you're going to get inflamed every now and again because people get sick and things like that happen. But like that's one thing. But that chronic, what they call chronic bad inflammation, or what I would call, bad inflammation sources, right? You get inflammation from bad sources. What causes that? So autoimmune disease, I just mentioned, is a big one. It's a huge one, right? And I mean, autoimmune disease it sucks, right? Like, for lack of better terms, it sucks. Whether it's, so basically what happens with autoimmune disease is your body is fighting itself, okay? And in that, I mean, you'll become inflamed because your body starts the inflammatory response. So those very beginning cells that I talked about, right? Those neutrophils and macrophages from the jump. I'm sorry, no, the dendritic cells and the macrophages from the jump, they will act and they're the security guards, right? But what they'll see is some part of your body that's normal and completely healthy, and they'll look at that part of the body as the enemy, and they'll jumpstart the inflammatory response, and they'll jumpstart the cleanup process and all that fun stuff on a perfectly healthy and perfectly fine portion of your body. Now, there's some research that says that, well, maybe there's a possibility that portion of your body isn't healthy and isn't perfectly normal, and that's why your body continuously responds to it. I don't know enough to tell you which way or the other to go with that, but I've done a lot of research, probably more than the average person, on autoimmune disease in general, because for as long as I've known my wife, she's had autoimmune disease, and we've had to go through plethora of different issues and things like that to just to make sure that she's able to um, to live, right? And in those times, I've learned quite a bit about how our bodies work, and I've dug into the research on a lot of different things, trying to understand how she works and how we can help her be better. And thankfully, thank God, we are at a point, or she's at a point where this is probably the best she's been in her life. She's in the best shape of her life. Her autoimmune disease, and that's what she has in general, is just generally autoimmune disease, which stinks because it can appear as ITP, MS, lupus, you name it, rheumatoid arthritis, you name it. It could appear that way because her body produces these antibodies that attack her, right? So we've had to deal with symptoms of all of those things over the years. Not fun at all. But again, thank God she's in the best health she's ever been in, right? And a lot of that comes through the process of, cleaning up your diet, exercising, doing these things, right? Trying to limit the toxins that enter your body, changes in the environment to make sure that you're not constantly attacking yourself. Like things like that help out tremendously. But I digress. Let me pull back a little bit. So we don't know I don't know necessarily whether it's your body. If you have autoimmune disease, if your body is actually correctly identifying something that's off, or if the receptors are off. I don't know. But at the end of the day, autoimmune disease is a huge cause of inflammation, right? Like I said, rheumatoid arthritis attacks the joints and the connective tissue. Lupus attacks your tissues and your organs, right? MS attacks the nerve coverings of your central nervous system, which stinks as well. ITP attacks your platelets. Like there's so many portions of your body that you would think are otherwise healthy that get attacked by these security guards, basically, who were just they were a little overzealous. Let's just say that. So if you have autoimmune disease, that is a huge cause of inflammation ongoing, right? Another one is a terrible diet, right? Look, if you have a terrible diet, I mean, your body essentially treats the unhealthy food components as a stressor. So it treats it as a toxin, something that doesn't belong in the body, right? Now, this is a twofold thing, right? You could think about like saturated and trans fats, right? You could think about overly processed foods. You could think about refined sugars and things like that. Those things typically lead to chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation because you're consistently feeding your body that stuff, and your body is consistently attacking it because it doesn't belong. Another big thing, though, is also these preservatives and chemicals that they typically put in foods. Look, think what you want about it, but half of that stuff doesn't belong in our body. The crazy thing about it is there's a whole list of things that don't belong in our bodies, but for some reason in America, we allow it. And in other countries, there's like a gazillion banned substances on that list that we apparently consume every day. So make of that what you will. Point is, those chemicals that don't belong in our foods, those dyes, like red dyes, blue dyes, all that doesn't belong in our body, right? And I'm not going to sound like some flighty hocus pocus, health guru or anything like that. It's just a fact of the matter. It's as simple as that. It doesn't belong in our body, so our body responds negatively towards it, right? So a lot of people can reduce their inflammation or reduce their bad inflammation just by cleaning up their diet, right? And obviously, smoking is terrible for you. Don't do it. Like, I don't know how many times I got to say that, but just don't do it. Like, there's literally no benefit to it at all whatsoever. None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Nothing. Okay, so don't smoke. And another thing is there are also environmental factors that I can't necessarily quantify myself, but you got to worry about those as well, right? Like, the quality of our air, the quality of our water, things like that, right? So those things will also, invade our system, and we treat it as a virus or bacteria or something like that, we have an inflammatory response because of it. Okay. So those are the things that cause it, right? And we already know I already went over what we could do for good inflammation, right? So the whole idea here is, right, inflammation by itself is not a good or a bad thing. It's always just a response, right? It's always a response to what's going on, right? So if you have a lot of inflammation all the time, then you might want to get some things checked out, right? You might want to go over your entire life with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that you're just not simply ingesting something. Make sure that, you potentially don't have some autoimmune disease. You potentially don't have other conditions and things like that going on. Because one thing I do agree with those folks who think, there's good and bad inflammation. They do say that bad inflammation is really bad. Like chronic inflammation is bad for you. You should not be inflamed all the time. I agree with them on that. You should not be. Even if you exercise a lot, like let's just say you exercise 5 days a week, that's still acute. That's not chronic. Like chronic inflammation is what happens when you overtrain, right? Where it's just like, it is not healing. Again, you don't want to kind of outkick your coverage here, right? Like you don't want to work past your ability to clean, repair, and heal, right? So again, and I'm saying, I said it, maybe that was the fourth time I said it because I want you to understand that if you don't take anything else from this, take that, right? Because that's inflammation that just won't go away, and it's not good for you long term, okay? So that's inflammation. That's what it is in a nutshell. Or maybe not a nutshell. And hopefully we got a little bit of chance to nerd out a little bit, but yeah, so, I just wanted to clarify that idea for y'all. Hopefully it gave you a little bit to work with, a little bit of ideas. And look, go clean up your diet. If you have a terrible diet, clean that mess up. Clean up your diet. Go out and exercise. Please, for the love of everything that's holy and true, go out and exercise. Go home and exercise. Get some dumbbells. Do some push-ups. Get some bands. I don't care, but exercise, please, because this is... And just a little bit of a tangent. And I'm struggling with it, right? Because I'm struggling with this idea of the injectables. And I started to talk about it a little bit when it comes to the testosterone injections. But the whole idea is eventually I'm getting to a point where I have to do an episode about the Ozempics and about the Wegovy's and about the semaglutides and tirzepatide, all that stuff, all the peptides, all the steroids, all this stuff. Like, eventually, I'm get to a point where I do an episode on that. I just don't know exactly where I fall on a lot of that stuff anymore. And I have reasons. So I'll explain it. But why am I mentioning that now? I'm mentioning that now because I don't want anybody to go out. My point is exercise. Whether you're doing an injectable or not, yeah, you gotta exercise. Like, please don't depend on some pharmaceutical anything to make your life 100% better for anything. Now, if you are not able to exercise, that's a different story. But the vast majority of people are. Please go out there and get some work in. Yeah. So that'll close us out. All right. So if you like this segment, here's another one for you. Click over here. And if you want the entire podcast, go this way. Click on that one right there. And once again, I appreciate you. All right. You take it easy.